go towards real world applicability. And a lot of her work recently has been on the concept of fun, which I think we can all relate to in a sport environment. Amanda, thanks again for joining this presentation today. And we're excited to have you here. I'll throw it over to you now, and yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jameson. Thank you, Wynn, for the invitation to be here today. We're going to spend the next 60 to 75 minutes exploring exactly what fun really means for young athletes, and then use this as an interactive platform. So I'm hoping that you all are excited and engaged to have this conversation and talk about how we move from the science into evidence-informed action as well. So just what you can expect for the next little bit of time that we're going to spend here is we're going to allocate a little bit of the time to actually distilling the science. And my goal and objective in doing this with you is to do this in a very fun and an engaging way, and not to bore you with the science. So I am really big on visuals, and I want to show you the science rather than talk at you regarding the science. Bridging off of that, I wanted to make this as interactive as possible when I go out and I do keynote talks and workshops across the world. My own style of speaking is to be very engaging and to engage you as part of this process. So we have some polls and breakouts that we'll do within our time together as well. And then really move towards how do we take the science and start to plan for action. So within each of your respective roles within the organization, either as a staff member or a coach, how do we actually move towards evidence-informed action? So just to kind of, I guess, get us started here a little bit, is I wanted to ask everyone here today, when I say fun, what are kind of the first things that come to mind, and what do you see as the value in studying this? I'm a psychologist by training, a sports psychologist. So I'm very comfortable with silence too. So there are no right or wrong answers here. Really just, I'm looking for, what do you all think? We talk about fun and understanding its significance, right? Within sport, most sport organizations purport to provide their young athletes with fun. So what really is maybe some of the significance behind really understanding this concept from a more scientific perspective?
Amanda, it looks like we got a number of good responses in the chat. So builds connection and desire to come back, enjoyable, stress relief, stress-free and free mind draws you in, time flies by. Everyone prioritizes fun in sports, but it's so hard to define for each person. So engaging over time, inclusive environment, a lot of really good stuff coming through the chat, looks like.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great responses. And I think you all are very on par with your thinking here, right? So fun is this 3-letter word, and it can feel very ubiquitous, even abstract sometimes, right? So we know when we're having fun. We also know most certainly when we're not having fun. But how do we actually go about dissecting what it is, what fun is for young athletes, and then how do we, as the adults that are in the positions that we're in for delivering and administering these programs, how do we make them the most fun? And why is fun such a critical part of young athletes' sport experience, right? We know from the science so far, and many studies have shown this over time, is that fun is the primary factor that drives kids to remain in sport. right? And lack of fun or the absence of it is the #1 reason why they drop out. So if, as an organization with Up2Us, our sort of collective goal and mission is to build healthier communities and safe communities, and to provide for children in all of the social, emotional, and physical ways that Up2Us Sports does, then we really, not only do we have to do a good job of actually engaging kids into sport, but also we have to find ways to actually keep them there so that they're motivated and want to continue to play. So moving along here, I just wanted to show you the science that we're going to sort of start to distill and better understand here today. So Jameson alluded to this concept of concept mapping, and that's essentially what we've done over the last handful of years. So the first paper that published, quote unquote, the fun maps came out in 2015. We've done a number of other studies with that same data that came out in 2018, and then most recently now in 2020, and that's gotten a lot of traction with the media and with sport organizations as well. So we're going to take this, and I'm going to show you exactly what it is that we did and how we can learn from it. So the fun maps are essentially a form of action research, right? So I myself, by trade and training and education, am what's called a scientist-practitioner, right? So I am very interested in application and applied work, working with kids, working with families, working with coaches, sport organizations, with a keen interest in how do we do really good, rigorous science and make it translatable. And so concept mapping is this type of research methodology that has really lended itself really well to all of us that are working in this sports space to have a truer understanding of what fun actually really is. And so just to kind of give you a framework in terms of what we did, is concept mapping in itself is a 3-step process. And so we worked with young athletes, coaches, and parents, and we asked them to first brainstorm all of the things that make playing sport fun, after which we asked them to sort all of those ideas and then to rate them, right? So we not only wanted them to be able to qualitatively identify everything that makes sport fun, but we also needed their help in discerning, well, of all of these different things, what is most fun and what is less fun, right? So rather than bore you with a bunch of research methodology, I thought I'd take a moment to kind of share with you what this actually looked like. So on the left-hand side of your screen, right, you see the word fun, that 3-letter word that has so much meaning, and everything that you see around it, those are what we call fun determinants. So when we engage the kids in identifying all of the things that makes playing sport fun, they did a phenomenal job, right, in being able to identify 81 specific things that make playing sport fun. It was absolutely incredible to sort of watch this all unfold. So the next thing we had them do was then to sort, and you can see an example of this on the right-hand side of your screen. So we placed each of these 81 ideas onto a laminated card, and we asked each of the young athletes to then sit with that deck of cards and to pile sort them in a way that made sense to them. And you can see kind of up at the top of your screen, the kid that had the yellow deck of cards. You can see the Post-its that are on top of her piles. And what we did is we asked the kids, as they were sorting all of their piles, to name each pile in their own words in a way that made sense. And then you can kind of see in the bottom right-hand corner the bowl of cheese puffs, which you can ignore as an unhealthy snack there as well. So after we had them sort, then we had them rate on a scale of 1 to 5 what is most important. So they did this for all 81 determinants, taking them in consideration with one another. So discerning what is most important from what is least important. So when we take all of this really rich data and we aggregate it together, then what we're able to do is to create these maps, right? This visual representation of what fun is inside the mind of a young athlete. And this is essentially how all of their individual input comes together collectively in one visual frame. So what we were able to identify is that of all the 81 determinants, they collectively sorted them into 11 different piles, or what we call fun factors. And when we asked them to name each of those piles, they did it collectively in totality in this way. So at the center of your screen, you can see in the purple, the two piles, those two fun factors that they named games and practices. So each of the circles, the black dots that you see, that's a data point. That is one of the 81 fun determinants. So in games alone, you can see that they were able to identify 6 different determinants of what makes games fun. And then just below that, you can see what they have found for practices as well. If we come over to the right-hand side of the map, this is what they collectively identified as internal factors to fun. So learning and improving, trying hard, and mental bonuses. Up at the north end of the map, we have all of the social constructs of fun. So positive team dynamics, team friendships, team rituals. And then over to the west, we have everything that is considered external to that experience. So swag, game time support, and positive coaching, right? So remember too that the third activity that we had them do was to rate all of these 81 fun determinants. And the reason why this is also considered a form of action research is because all of this data that the young athletes gave us gives us very precise directional beacons in terms of understanding what is most important from what is least important, right? They did a great job of taking that 3-letter word and being able to distill it into these 81 specific things. They organized it for us, and now they're telling us, hey, this is what is most important. And so the way that we're able to visually construct this on the fun map is through this layering effect that you see here. So if you look at the key down the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, the number of layers that each of the piles or the factors has corresponds directly with how important it was rated. So piles that have a greater number of layers were rated more important, and piles with less were rated of lower importance. So in this one visual snapshot that you see here, it's very easy to see that the top 3 fun factors were trying hard, positive team dynamics, followed by positive coaching. Consequently, we can also see that swag and team rituals, which are just 1 layer, were rated less important, right? So what's important, no pun intended, but what's critical to understand here too is not to make the error in associating less important with not important, right? These are all things that kids have identified as making the sport experience fun. And so each of these data points or each of these factors and piles just contributes more or less to that experience. So moving along here, one of the cool things that we can do is, just like any type of map, you can zoom in for more information, right? So we're able to take kind of this aerial snapshot and understand that we have these 81 specific determinants. They've been organized into these piles, but what is contained in each of these piles? So when we talk about what is most fun for young athletes and they're saying trying hard, what does that actually mean to them? So we can take that one cluster, that one pile, and zoom in on it. And each of these data points here corresponds to what you see in the green box, right? So everything from working really hard and giving high effort. The kids talk a lot about being active and constantly moving, playing well during a game, the feeling of being strong and confident, having the opportunity to compete, not only setting goals, but achieving those goals, and making good plays, good saves, things like that. As another example, if we move up here with positive team dynamics, we can see that each of the data points here, when we zoom in, relates to things like not only supporting my teammates, but also being supported by my teammates, showing good sportsmanship and doing things together in a coordinated collective way, whether it's warming up and stretching or it's actually playing well together during a competition. Over here on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see positive coaching, right? Which I'm sure many of you are quite interested in as coaches yourselves. So when we think about for young athletes, what do they define as a fun coach, right? Someone that's highly knowledgeable about the sport that they can learn from, that is highly encouraging, that creates a psychologically and emotionally safe environment in which they have the opportunity to make mistakes in the process of learning. A coach that is approachable and easy to talk to, that is even able to get into the mix of things and interact and practice with them during training sessions as well, right? So the young athletes did an incredible job of really being able to parcel out very specific actions and behaviors to really get at all of the granular nuances when we talk about what actually makes sport fun for young athletes. So moving along here, I think Wynn is going to put in the chat box a link to this specific coaching guide for you here. And so if each of you can click on that link to the Google Drive, then you will be able to bring up this coaching guide, which you will probably be able to view and see in greater detail than you can on the Zoom screen here. But what I want to point out is what we've been able to do is to take the scientific data and to really distill it down into very simple infographic that coaches, administrators, sport organizations can use as a point of program planning when we talk about how do we actually start to go about implementing these things. So very similar to how we kind of broke the map down in this example here, we've taken everything and distilled it down into this one infographic that you see here. So the way in which everything is organized is from most important to least important, right? These are our directional indicators that are going to help us in terms of program planning. Where do we allocate our resources, both as coaches, as an organization at large, right? So collectively, when we look at all the players, so girls and boys, younger players, older players, rec players, travel players, when we take all of their rating data together, on average, right, they're saying that trying hard is most important, followed by positive team dynamics, followed by positive coaching. So that was the top 3 triangle that you saw there on the map. Learning and improving comes next. Then we have games and practice, followed by team friendships, mental bonuses, game time support, team rituals, and swag. And so each of the bullets, each of the fun determinants that you see listed under each factor is in order of most important to least important based upon the scientific data. So one of the sort of big questions that we always get when looking at all of this is essentially, what is more important for girls or what is more important for boys? So if I'm a coach and I am coaching a co-ed team, I want to kind of know, well, what collectively are both the girls and the boys sort of fun priorities, if you will. Or if I'm if I'm coaching an all girls team, then I'm probably most important or most interested in what is most important to girls versus boys. So you can see the poll that's been put up here. And so I'd love for you all to just kind of interact with me a little bit here and take your top guesses based upon the 11 fun factors. What are the 2 top rated fun factors for girls? And then if you scroll down, there's a second question that will ask you the same thing for boys.
And hi, Amanda. We've had some little technical difficulties. So Nate, if you could put up poll number 4 on in the polling button.
Oh, it was up and now.
Oh, is it up? I can't see it, and I lost my polling privileges, unfortunately. So
I can see it. It's up. I don't know if everyone else can, but
okay, good.
It's up, but the problem is it says girls and girls in both questions. So the top.
Yes, I was going to say the same.
Oh.
It both says girls. So do we want to say that the top one is girls and the second question is boys?
Yes, please. Thank you, Danielle.
No problem.
Get about half of everyone so far. Okay, so we've got about 65% of everyone here has voted so far. So question number 1, what are the top two rated fun factors for girls? And it looks like the top responses are, whoop. Okay, it keeps, sorry, it keeps moving on me. Oh, here we go. Okay, final results. So for girls, we have team friendships, followed by, it looks like maybe positive coaching and positive team dynamics are neck and neck. And then for boys, games and practices, along with trying hard, were pretty equal. So when we look at the data, right, this is a very common expectation that we get all the time, and what we would expect for girls and what we would expect for boys. So what's interesting though is when we look at this data, these commonly held gender expectations and stereotypes don't appear to hold within the data. So this idea that what is most important for girls is team friendships and that social experience, Whereas for boys, it's all about competing. So this idea of learning and improving, the practices, the games, those being most paramount for them. And so what I want to do is just kind of take a moment here and show you the data more specifically. So here we have, can get pull out of the way. Okay. So on the two axes, so we have girls on the left axis and boys on the right axis. And based upon the data, this is a very easy visual way to compare the two across the 11 fun factors. So at the bottom of each axis, you have the minimum mean value of importance, so 2.55, all the way up to the highest, which was 4.40. And then we're able to place the 11 fun factors on each of these axes and then draw a line across to see what is the level of congruence or parallel between how these are being rated. And so what you find here is that girls and boys are dramatically the same when it comes to what is fun, right? And so what's really cool about being able to travel around the world and to share this data is that all of the female coaches and the female administrators that are sitting in the audience, they have this huge grin on their face and in their eyes, and they're smiling back in such a way that it's like, yes, right? Like, finally, I feel like this data it's resounding in the sense that what I want from my sport experience and what makes it the most fun is exactly the same as the boys, right? And so what's cool about looking at this data in this way is that we see this sort of clustering effect that's occurring too, right? So trying hard, positive team dynamics, positive coaching, 1, 2, and 3, same for girls and boys. Team rituals and swag, bottom 2, same for girls and boys. Everything else that's clustered in the middle, pretty much exactly the same, right? And so another way in which we can measure this is by looking at the R value that we have below, right? This R value is what we call a correlation coefficient. So if you want to geek out on numbers with me here for a second, right? This R value can range from -1 to +1, right? So if it's net or closer to -1, it means that girls and boys are inversely related. So as one rates something high, the other one rates something low. What we are finding here in this data is the exact opposite, which is that they are positively related. So that R value, which can only go as high as 1.0, when we compare girls and boys, that R value is 0.95, right? Which is pretty incredible in social psychological research to get values this high. So moving on to the next, we have a poll for younger versus older, right? So there's inherently oftentimes a age effect that we tend to expect as well. So think about coaching, you know, your younger players versus your older players when it comes to fun and knowing what the fun maps comprise. When you think about the younger kids, what do you think are the top fun factors for them compared to the older kids, which should be question number 2, I believe. We'll just give everyone a second to vote.
There's a question in chat about what ages is considered young or what age is considered older.
Oh, that's a great question. So the younger kids are typically in these studies were U8, U9 up to U13. And then the older kids were U14 to U19.
And Amanda, there was a question earlier that asked if if you're familiar with, are there fun maps for adults, perhaps?
No, I get that question quite often, right? Have we specifically done this with adult athletes or with adults in general? No, but we can talk about what that might look like here shortly, for sure. It's a good question.
And then a recent question, if this was done with students playing soccer or other sports?
Great question. So for this particular study, we recruited primarily or exclusively from the sport of soccer, given the high concentration rate of soccer in the Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland area. And also we chose soccer because it is one of the most socioeconomically accessible sports for kids to play. But I will say an important caveat to that is that 75.5% of the young athletes that participated in this particular study also played other sports as well. Okay, so we have about 73, the majority of us here have voted, so I think this is a good indication. So it looks like the top rated fun factors for the younger players are team friendships, followed by positive coaching. And then for the older players, games and practices is number 1, followed by looks like learning and improving. Very good. And that's a typically expected age effect that people typically think that we're going to find in the data. And so I am excited to show you here that what is actually fun for younger players is categorically similar to the older players, right? So what we would expect to happen in the data is exactly the opposite. So looking here again, we have younger players on the left-hand axis, older players on the right. And you can kind of see again, we have pretty much the exact same clustering effect, right? With the first, second, and third rated highest, the bottom 2, and then everything kind of clustered in the middle. And then that R value is actually 0.97. So again, quite high. Quite high. So moving next, the final way in which we can categorize, or we tend to categorize and organize young athletes in sport, right, is not only by their sex or gender and by their age, but also by their competition or playing level, right? So we were really keen and interested to look at what are the potential effects that might be occurring when we look at rec kids versus highly competitive travel kids when it comes to fun. So on the poll here, again, you're doing the exact same thing. What is most important for the rec kids versus what is most important for the highly competitive travel kids? All right, I think we've got an overwhelming majority. So if we want to close the poll for the final. Great. So the expectation is for the grassroots rec players that team friendships are paramount, all right, followed by, looks like probably positive team dynamics. And then for the travel players, over half indicated games and practices, followed by positive team dynamics, right? So very similar, right? These are kind of the playing level or competition level effects that are often expected when we look at this data. And so what's really cool to show you here again is that there's an overwhelming similarity between these two groups. So the sentiment that, you know, grassroots players, that's where you go to have fun, but if you really want to be a highly competitive athlete, then, and, you know, play on the highly select travel teams, that those experiences are devoid of fun. And what's really cool to see is that it looks nearly exactly the same, right? So rec players on the left-hand axis, travel players on the right-hand axis, and then we see once again this exact same clustering effect, right? So most important in terms of being the first tier, second tier, and then bottom tier being the least important. And then again, we have a very high R value as well. So what is this data actually saying, right? So we looked at it in this way, right? The 11 fun factors and compared them to one another across these three groups. We can also take that more zoomed in, nuanced look at things, and we can plot each of the 81 fun determinants on an X and Y axis to compare girls and boys, younger and older, rec and travel. And it's just another way to kind of look at this data to see the overwhelming similarity. So if we have girls on the X axis down here, boys on the Y, right? And we plot each of the 81 determinants in terms of how important it was rated, you see a very, very clear linear line, right? That highly positive association between girls and boys. Same thing again here when we look at the younger players compared to the older players. Very strong linear line. And then again, when we compare the grassroots rec players to the travel players. So this visual representation is very telling, right? And I think it's a more profound way to really dissect science rather than just looking at a bunch of numbers or statistics. And so the question really is, you know, science supports what's called the gender similarities hypothesis in the literature, right? And there's an overwhelming amount of science that supports this, that we as girls and boys, men and women, are more similar to one another than we are different. But yet, what tends to prevail is the gender differences hypothesis, which says that we are categorically different from one another. So why is it that in the face of all of this scientific evidence, we still so very strongly hold these sentiments that we're all so different from one another rather than being more of the same? One is that visual illusions lead to cognitive errors, right? So girls and boys, right, they tend to look very different from one another, right? That visual representation of what a girl looks like and what a boy looks like leads to these cognitive errors, right? So the way in which, from a psychology standpoint, our brain works is because something appears on the outset, on the surface level, to look different, we automatically then expect there to be these drastic differences between them. We also live in a society of cultural norms and expectations, especially when it comes to gender, but also when it comes to age and to playing level effects, right? And so the expectation that girls, what drives fun for them are the social aspects, right? When the data that we have so far and the data that we're seeing overseas that we've been collecting with the Swedish ice hockey and the basketball federations as well, is showing overwhelmingly that girls and boys, younger and older, rec and travel, are really more the same than they are different. What happens though is that, and there are lots of studies that have shown this, both with adults as well as with younger children, is just simply the mere act of trying to or having to sort anything, right? Whether it's objects or it's human beings into different categories leads us to these sorting biases where we then have these expectations for differences. And ultimately, the way in which organized sport is set up is that we do that exact same thing with young athletes, right? We sort them into different teams or into different leagues based upon age, based upon sex or gender, based upon their playing level. So it inherently sort of sets us up to make these cognitive errors. So when thinking about that, what the data is showing us so far is that what these young athletes are saying, right, is that please remember that we are more similar than we are different when it comes to what makes playing sport fun for us. And why is that so important? Because it's the number one driver of what engages and keeps kids at every level of sport engaged for the long haul, right? And that's what we all ultimately want. So these sort of take back messages that are coming through in all of the studies that we've been doing so far is, one, as coaches, as administrators, as people that are working in the sports space with youth, is to beware of these cognitive errors that we as humans innately make because of the way in which society, organized sport, everything around us leads us to make these visual errors, these cognitive errors, these availability heuristics. Likewise, right, remembering then that the data is showing us so far that these young athletes are more similar to one another than they are different. And so we don't need to necessarily coach or deliver to girls in categorically different ways than we do boys, right? Same thing with age and competition level. Likewise, as coaches, as administrators, when you think about Up2Us Sports and your mission and your vision and everything that you guys do around trauma-informed coaching, right? You have a great appreciation for this idea that words matter, right? So the words that we choose are ultimately important in how we frame things. So if you have the opportunity with the infographic, with the scientific studies, and all of the other ways in which we can interact with this data to really understand that what the young athletes are telling us is that fun is ultimately athletic development, right? It's not goofing around, it's not being off task. That young athletes, when it comes to what is paramount to having fun, is being able to train and to compete and to participate in an environment with a positive coach that creates these highly motivational climates that are safe for kids to learn and to make mistakes and to succeed in, while being on the field and off the field in these dynamic social relationships that they also have with their teammates, right? So another way to kind of, I think, distill all of this is to think about, you know, how do we move the science into practice, right? And we can study the maps, we can dissect them, we can take little parts of it and talk about how do we infuse it. I think another very practical way to think about all of the data and what the fun maps have really kind of elevated in terms of what young athletes' voices are telling us through all of this science is that ultimately for young athletes, right, no matter girls or boys, rec or travel, younger or older, at the heart of fun is this process of development, right? That's ultimately what they want, and that is what makes playing fun. So if development is learning new skills and being able to apply something that you did in practice into a game, it's getting to the next level, right? It's those small incremental improvements. Then one of the ways that we can really start to think about fun is to kind of think about it more from a sensory standpoint, right? So what the fun maps have shown us is that for young athletes, for these kids, fun is a very physical experience, right? It's a very tactile experience. It's getting touches on the ball. It's actually staying active and moving, right? They don't like sitting around or standing around or sitting on the sideline. They like getting playing time. That's critically important. Having the opportunity to compete. So when we think about fun as a sensory experience from the physical, tactile, kinesthetic sense, I think that's helpful in remembering how do we actually go about implementing these things. Fun is also a very verbal experience, right? So the kids are talking about in terms of what they need or what they're looking for from what they would describe as a fun coach is someone that gives clear communication, right? They always talked about, it was really helpful to know exactly what it was the coach expected or wanted them to do. This idea of guided discovery and our questioning and the way that we coach, right? So rather than directing kids what to do, right, and being very transactional, how do we go about being much more transformational in our coaching tactics and using guided discovery to question so that they start to develop that game IQ. Fun is also a very social emotional experience, right? And how do we do that as coaches, right? We do that through active listening. We do that by building up their confidence, by creating these psychologically and emotionally safe environments around them in order to learn and develop. On that same token, right, it's a very social experience, especially when we talk about team sports, right? And it goes back to this tactile part of it as well, right? So high-fiving, fist bumping, hugging, cheering, things like that. That in the wake of COVID or kind of post-COVID, a lot of those things will probably change. Doing, elbow touches and things like that. But just having that sense of connection in a highly supportive environment and those social bonds are an important part of the experience as well. And then finally, the environment, right? So thinking about having well-organized practices, right? Kids identify, they're able to articulate and say, what is really fun about practice is when it's well-organized, right? And what does a well-organized practice look like? They talk about doing small-sided games and drills, right? Why do we think that that is more fun? Well, they get more touches on the ball, right? There's more opportunity to interact. There's more opportunity in those small-sided games and drills to actually compete against one another in a training environment. Having good field and playing and training conditions, which we're not always in full control over, for sure, but making the most of what we have in those environments and giving kids the opportunity to compete, right? Having evenly matched games to the extent possible, or redesigning goals around our games if we know that we're competing against a team that is not necessarily evenly matched, and redirecting focus in that way can be pivotal, right? So these are kind of ways in which we can then think about fun, I think from more of a sensory standpoint that helps us better kind of conceptualize and keep these things at the forefront of our mind. So another way to kind of think about it is think about a logic model, right? And I think Up2Us Sports has done a great job at your sport impact model and really thinking about, jumped ahead. Really thinking about from all of the inputs and the activities and what are the short-term and long-term outputs and outcomes, and how do we go about really thinking about when we glean new scientific evidence, whether it's the fun maps or other sport science, how do we then go about intentionally and actively building these into our frameworks? The outcome essentially is that we want to be able to provide these high quality fun sport experiences. When we can do that, we can foster what's called the 3 Ps, which many of you are probably quite familiar.
Oh no, it looks like we might have lost Amanda for a second.
Hello?
With, right? The outcome of the 3 Ps being.
What happened? Is anybody there?
Yes.
Yep. It looks like we may have lost Amanda for a second. Jameson, do you?
I'm back.
Jameson, if you're talking, you're on mute.
When can you
Amanda,
see me?
yeah,
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
yeah.
Not sure what happened.
Yeah, we lost you at the 3 Ps just around then. So if you can just try and reshare, and then we can, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what I've put together for you here is just so that you can see sort of the logic behind how do we infuse fun, how can we use the fun maps in terms of the science, the application piece in order to achieve these outputs, outcomes, and impact, right? And I think in many ways that this can align quite well with the Up2Us Sports impact model, which the organization I think has done quite a phenomenal job in being able to identify all of these things. So if our mission collectively is to engage, train, and support coaches to transform youth programs and communities, and the ultimate sort of outcome that we're looking for in terms of impact is being a part of and building these communities that are healthy, safe, and resilient, that also need to ultimately be fun, right? If we want to keep these kids engaged in the sports programming that we all love so much and you know, are so invested in providing them, how do we go about more intentionally creating these experiences in a way that meets them where they're at, right? And really has a truer understanding of what fun is and what young kids, older kids, girls and boys, rec and travel are really looking for. So I think that took a bit more time than I had planned. So we're already at the hour mark, but the intention next was to spend a little bit of time breaking everyone into these collective breakout groups to kind of start to move the needle on a conversation in terms of how do we actually take the science that we have explored here today and start to move that into action. So Wynn and Jameson, I don't know what you guys want to do next relative to the amount of time we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can, let's break off into breakout rooms. How does a nice round number like 8 minutes sound? Does that sound okay to you, Amanda? Will that give us enough time to have some conversation? And then we'll have about that amount left for question and answer.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
So
Cool.
the two questions that I thought would be great for us to kind of start the discussion around in the breakout groups is really looking for where are the opportunities for implementation, right? So thinking about your own role, whether it's as a coach or a staff member, you know, are there ways in which that we can start to move this science into the impact model? From a monitoring and evaluation standpoint, is there value in measuring fun, right? To measure is to know. So think about in the context of everything else that you all might measure in your programs. Thinking about certification, program planning, other areas for impact. And then after identifying what those opportunities could potentially be, thinking about, well, what are actionable steps that we can make towards doing that?
Right. All right, I'm going to break everyone up into breakout rooms now. So see you in a few minutes.
Jameson, could you actually include, oh, I guess we don't have her prompts. Danielle asked for the prompts into
Oh,
the breakout
I
room.
think I have.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm bringing him back, Wynn.
Environment, you know.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I was just saying I was so sad to have left my group.
Yeah, I had to play a little bit of timekeeper there. I wanted to leave some time for Q&A and some quick debrief, but Amanda, I can throw it back over to you if you have any last thoughts before Q&A.
Well, I think, I guess we can just sort of, for the next couple minutes, maybe before we go into the Q&A, and I can maybe share a little bit of what my group was talking about, which I think would be great for the whole of us. But just from an implementation standpoint, where are you guys seeing, I guess, opportunities for evidence-informed action? I don't know if it's more comfortable to do that during the chat, or to just sort of unmute yourself and share.
I didn't hear the question.
So the question was, what are the opportunities for implementation that you all were able to identify?
My group discussed more of how we speak to our kids and communicate with them on, like, for me, I'm normally really silly with my softball players. I have parents that I coach with, and they're very like, I want to, we're going to do this. And when you get on this field, like, it should be like this. And I actually played, but I'm like, oh, if you're at 70% today, just give me the 70%.
Yeah.
Or I, tend to be silly with them, or, agree like, okay, after our first win, I'll do a TikTok with you or something.
Yeah. That's great, Danielle. Thank you for sharing. And I think that was, you're talking about more of like those opportunities on the field. And I think in my group, part of it was, I think identifying that we have a real opportunity in the coaching training that you all receive within the organization to kind of infuse more of the scientific findings to inform what we do. Anyone else?
My group, we talked a little bit about like the try hard aspect of fun, and how we don't know that, and maybe CTI is an opportunity to kind of stress that more, and even to standardize a little bit, because obviously everyone has a different definition of what trying hard looks like. And then we also talked about like incorporating it across the board. So I know Kevin in our group mentioned not just on the field or on the court, but also in the classroom. And we talk about these SEL outcomes and kind of standardizing what hard work and trying hard looks like and how it can apply across contexts.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great, and that really kind of, I think, bridges what the conversation was in the group that I was in. And it was, kind of the sentiment that, like, wait, what are you telling me? Like, trying hard is fun, right? And that kids, no matter, when you look at the data, right, that's the #1 fun factor. So if we can create through the positive coaching and create that positive team dynamics, we are then going to, you know, create an environment where kids really want to try hard, right? That ultimately is fun. And I think it's an interesting experience because, you know, I would make the assumption that all of us here are athletes, right? And if you really kind of reflect back on, you know, what makes sport fun for you, so kind of, I think, bridging back to the question about, you know, are there fun maps for adults, right? And what I have found in sharing this, you know, around the world is that all of us kind of look at the fun maps as adults and reflect back and say, those are the exact same things that I need in my athletic or physical activity and exercise experiences that make it fun for me, right? And a big part of that is that motivation, that effortfulness, that as coaches we really want, we're looking for, and we're trying to cultivate that in our athletes as well, for sure.
I guess, Amanda, I've just been thinking about how do we make it, you know, be comfortable with making it more of a centerpiece and even something like our impact model and or theory of change and how we talk about our work more broadly. I don't know, I think this just provides some real validation for what we're doing, but also just another way that we can kind of name it. And so I guess that's, as I've been listening to your conversation, that's what I was really getting out of it as well.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think, you know, for whether it's Up2Us Sports or it's, you know, other organizations, and thinking very strategically in terms of, you know, what our logic models or impact models are, how we, you know, go about getting more funding from sponsors and things like that. The extent to which, you know, I think as Jameson was talking about, you know, when you look at the science, there is truly a validating aspect of it, right? Because you're like, oh, we do this and we do that, and like, you know, but part of it is changing how we talk about it and how we present it externally, right? Not just to funders and sponsors, which can help us get more money for our programs and for our organization, by saying like, what we do is grounded in science, right? And let me show you how. But also, you know, going back to that sentiment that words matter. So, you know, how Danielle was talking about how she talks to her kids versus how parents are expecting coaches to talk to their kids, right? And doing what we can through coach education, parent education to, you know, to narrow that disparity in those expectations can be pivotal. So I know we're close to time, and you know, it's a big question to ask. You know, where are all of the opportunities by which we can start to take action, and what do those actionable steps like really look like? But I thought, you know, kind of doing this exercise here today is really important, because so often, you know, we are the recipients on the receiving end of webinars and workshops and clinics where we have a lot of information thrown at us, and then we kind of, you know, that's it, and we walk away. And so I think by just trying to engage us cognitively and intellectually in a very applied way to really start to think about, you know, what does this look like? How do we actually start to translate it? Just moves us, like moves the needle a little bit more in our ability to do that. And so, you know, I just want to say, you know, to Wynn and to Jameson, thank you for the opportunity to be here, to share all of this with you all today. Always feel free to reach out and connect and ask questions, or talk about, you know, from a monitoring and evaluation standpoint, where is the value in measuring fun? I mean, that's something that we're working towards doing more and more. So
Awesome. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much, Amanda. And yeah, we're the whole Up2Us team is so appreciative of you speaking with us about your work. And again, I think it's so in line with a lot of what we're doing. And gives us, I think, increased confidence in continuing with some of our methodology and principles. And that again is validating. And I think but that's not our only takeaway. You know, I think we've identified areas where we can polish up our approach, and so hopefully we can be in touch moving forward here. You've opened the door to talk about how to measure, about measurement. So be careful. We might be emailing you later this afternoon, but I'm sure we'll have other questions around training and program design as well. So yeah, and thank you to everyone else who joined, and to all the coaches around the country. We hope you're doing well, and it was great to have you on during again our all staff retreat. So we did record the session, and Amanda, we might compile the top 5 or 10 questions that came in during the chat, and if we can send them over to you via email, we can get them back out to people. But yeah. Until the next Lunch and Learn, I guess, we will see you all again. And Up2Us staff, let's plan to come back in 15 minutes. So at 35 past, okay? All right, bye everyone.
Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Amanda.
Amanda.
Appreciate it.